You are welcome to the polling station. An old Paul Christian Murty this week, but we do have Neil Channing in, we do have William Kedjanyi in, and I'm Johnny Ward, and we're going to reflect on the by-election results last week and a little bit of a change in the betting for when Boris leaves office. Boris, of course, is over in Germany at the summit, the G7 summit, and he will have missed the fact that Nicola Sturgeon is pushing for a Scottish referendum plan, but he won't have missed two dismal results again in the by-elections. And last night, Theresa May leading the opposition to the plan to override the protocol in terms of new legislation. As much as it has been passed, there's a lot of opposition in the Conservative Party to another incredible state of affairs, really, in terms of what the UK is doing with the EU over the protocol. But let's go back to these election results, starting with you, Neil. We at times we thought Tiverton and Honiton might be close. It wasn't close. And this all means, in terms of the latest Star Sports betting, that Boris Johnson, his year to leave is now 2022 6-4 favourite. Discuss.
Yeah, again, we had this situation on that year to leave market, which is such a funny market, really, where I think 3 days before the by-elections, 2022 was trading at 5-2, with 2024 later trading at about 5-4. They were 100-1 on to in Wakefield, Labour, and the Lib Dems were in the region of 4-11 a couple of days before to win in Tiverton and Honiton. So you could reasonably assume that the Tories were going to get beaten in both by-elections, which is what happened. Yet Boris Johnson's leave date has gone from 5-2 into 6-4. And right now I can see on Betfair somebody's trying to have $2,000 at 6-4, which, it's a fairly chunky bet in this market. There's also like 1,500 waiting behind it at 2.56. This is a market that frequently just moves on 30 quids and 40 quids. These are big bets. There was a guy the other day trying to have $6,000 on 2024 or later at 13-8. He seemed to give up after a while. He got quite a lot matched. That's trading at nearer to 15-8. So it is kind of funny that I don't really know what these people that are trying to back it at 6-4 couldn't see last week at 5-2, given that they were kind of, around about 4-11 to win to lose both by-elections, the Tories. I don't think we've learned a huge amount since. I guess, if you start off with Wakefield, just finding it amusing because the Labour Party leadership office got very upset with eminent pollster Sir John Curtis. So Sir John Curtis, as you'll know, is Mr. BBC, the voice of polling. He said that, in short, Wakefield provides less than decisive evidence of a new enthusiasm for Labour. Indeed, it's striking that a 17.3-point fall in the Conservative tally was more than twice the 8.1-point increase in Labour support. And much of the damage to the Tories appears to have been done by a former local Tory councillor who stood as an independent after calling for Boris Johnson to resign and who won as much as 7.6% of the vote. Now, the Labour leadership were immediately going mental on social media, saying, how could John Curtis be giving his opinion of what happened in the by-election? He's framing the way people are starting to think about it. That's our job to tell people how they're supposed to think about the result. Which I did think was kind of amusing.
Well, it wasn't a good result for Labour, actually, because it's hard to gauge.
Obviously it's a good result for Labour. They won a Tory seat in a red wall,
which they're 100-1
constituency. But at the end of the day, it's one seat. In terms of voting in Parliament, doesn't make much difference. They managed to get their man in. The selection process was slightly stitched up. The new MP was Mary Creagh's former political advisor. He's definitely on the right of the party. He'll be a supporter of Keir Starmer. So that's good. All of those things are good news for Keir Starmer. In terms of the chances of Labour winning a general election, I don't think Wakefield really tells you much. It just tells you that the turnout was quite low. People didn't really kind of rush for either side. So, obviously a lot of those red wall seats could easily flip back. You know, a lot of them were traditional Labour seats where Labour had never lost them before 2019. If Labour do have a kind of, I mean, in the national polls, they're about 5% ahead. There was a poll today where they're 5% ahead. If they do have a 5% lead, yeah, they'll win a few of those red wall seats. They won't win all of them.
Yeah.
I don't think they can get carried away with it. But I think for Boris Johnson, the Tiverton and Honiton is a lot more worrying for many reasons. First of all, a resurgence of the Lib Dems means that he's getting attacked on both fronts. He's got, he's got to kind of lean right and be kind of more Brexity and socially conservative in order to attract his older voter base in the north of England. But he's also got to be worried about this phenomenon that we talked about over the time of the by-election, this Waitrose woman, the kind of Tory, sort of slightly Remainy, David Cameron-y, you know, slightly socially liberal, but maybe, you know, conservative with a small c. And that's a hard coalition to hold together. And if the Lib Dems are able to, you know, win such places where the majorities are so big, well, that makes it really hard for the Tories to fight on both fronts. Of course, there's a lot to be said about Tiverton and Honiton is an absolutely fascinating by-election. I think Wakefield, to be honest, was a bit dull.
Yeah, what's your take on it, William? Because if you had a functional Conservative government right now, you'd be asking questions about how well Labour is actually doing. Like, this is such a dysfunctional. I mean, any party that doesn't say anything that's in opposition will be doing well now, because Boris, this is 4 out of 5 by-elections where they've been awful results. And I know the circumstances behind some of the outgoing Conservative MPs have been fairly bizarre and quite grotesque in some places. Even so, like, how well is Labour actually doing? Because the Lib Dems is obviously doing well in these by-elections. Labour were 100 to 1 on to win that election. The 8 grand versus 16, or the 8% versus 16% that Neil talks about is obviously relevant. So what are the kind of fallouts for the two by-elections? I mean, Boris is facing so many problems here. I think the whole protocol thing is the greatest load of nonsense ever. And I don't think he gives a shit about it, being honest. Doesn't give a shit about Northern Ireland, but sees some reason to pick a fight with the EU. So what's your take on it all?
My take on it, a joint take on those two by-election results, would suggest that if Boris Johnson makes it to the next general election, and there is not a substantial change either in economic circumstance or political circumstance that allows the Conservative Party to have a positive offer, he will lose. You could put many reasons for that, but fundamentally, he's going to be really stretched to win back the voters who left him in Tiverton and Honiton, and also the voters who went back to Labour in Wakefield. And that's a big thing I think we shouldn't lose sight of. The Tories could be trying to run one campaign aimed at different voters with sort of different motivations. And I don't think we should lose sight of that. Regarding Wakefield, I think it sort of confirms roughly that the polls are broadly right, that Labour have a lead. It's not a big one. Cue the 20 points ahead meme, insert here, etc. They're not 20 points ahead. They are ahead. They're within, I would say, the range of like 280 to 300 seats, depending on where the votes.
Just quickly, sorry to interrupt, but just I was just looking at the polling because I've seen a few polls pop up. I think there's been 4 polls since the two by-elections. So we got 6 points to Labour, 38-32 was the first one out, both down 1 from their previous. Then there was an opinion where it was 37-34 with Labour up 1 to 37 from their previous. Then there was a Redfield-Wilton, which is 8 points, 41-33 with the Tories up 1. And then there was a YouGov just today with Labour 39 and the Tories 34 up 1. I just, the Tories are up 1 with 3 of those firms since last week. Sorry, Will, carry on.
No, it's a good point. It's a worthy point to make, because that can give us a sort of broader context to it. Also worth noting, Opinion have changed their methodology for these, I think. So previously they had larger Labour leads. They've changed the methodology. It's worth looking up. So they might have a smaller one. I've said before quite a bit that Keir Starmer is on course to become Prime Minister, but that I think to do it, to get there, he'll need to do something other than not being Jeremy Corbyn. I probably still agree with that, knowing what a general election campaign would bring. But I think Labour are broadly on course to be where they need to be. They're not. I'm not saying they're performing really well, but at the moment, I think they're about there-ish. You know, it's slow and steady is intended to win the race. Whether it will, I don't know. I couldn't look that further forward into the future. Tiverton and Honiton is really big on a number of levels. And yes, I know that Lib Dems can target by-elections really successfully because obviously they got a great ground game and they can hit those doors, and because they can focus the resources, it gives them a chance. But still, let's put this into context, right? Wakefield is the 48th most marginal Tory seat on 2019 numbers. It should be up for grabs, given a sort of normal swing or whatever. Labour won it by, I think they had a 12% swing, all good. Tiverton and Honiton is the 296th most marginal seat, according to the 2019 results. If they can lose there, and not just lose there,
they were beaten so comfortably as well.
Yeah. If they can lose that by that amount, depending on where the resources are sent and where the votes fall, in theory, no Tory MP is safe. And that's a big problem in terms of a rock and a hard place, particularly also as the Conservatives, they did pick a local candidate. I don't think they ran a very good campaign with Helen Hereford, but this was not the same case as it was in North Shropshire when the candidate was airdropped in. And Tiverton and Honiton, it's got a real Conservative history. And it would suggest to me that Johnson is damaging the brand.
But he is. It's quite clear. I mean, how could you even admit to voting for the Conservatives under this man at this stage?
Well, it's something that true blue Tories are evidently not able to do. That's probably the bigger problem for them. I would suggest losing that sort of voter rather than the up for grabs.
Neil,
just on the Tiverton and Honiton. Of course, one of the most significant things about that result is that Labour came second in 2019 in Tiverton and Honiton with 11,600 votes. And, you know, if you go back to 2017, they've always been a kind of solid, you know, turnout of Labour voters there. If you're a Labour voter in Tiverton and Honiton, you basically know that you've got no chance of seeing your person win, but you're going out there in reasonable numbers, you know. In the by-election, the Labour candidate got 1,562 votes. No support from outside of the constituency from the Labour Party. There was a tacit acceptance that the best thing to do was to help the Lib Dems to win and give the Tories a bloody nose. And, you know, sometimes in the past that hasn't really worked. And obviously, you know, some people are not really into politics. They just vote tribally for the same person every single time. They don't. Tactical voting is not a thing that this country is very good at, generally speaking. And, you know, I think when we talk about this result for the Lib Dems being replicated, I think the negative argument against that is to say, well, a general election is, you know, 40 Tiverton and Honitons all going on at the same time. The Lib Dems were saying that they sent 556 activists, I think, into the constituency the Saturday before. You know, that's quite a lot of people, but at the end of the day, they're going to be contesting quite a lot of rural constituencies. They don't have the money or the people to do that on 40 fronts. You know, they're going to have to be. One of the mistakes that Jo Swinson made was that she was way too ambitious and optimistic for the Lib Dems, and they spread their resources way too thinly under her, and tried to say that they were going to win lots of constituencies where they basically had no chance. They need to be really careful that they don't start. What's the expression that people use? Smoking their own gear. Is that what they say? One of the people say they
getting high on their own supply. I think is
getting high on their own supply. That was what I meant to say. Yeah, they need to not get too carried away by this result and start to think that they're going to be, you know, getting 100 MPs or whatever. I think if they get 20 MPs at the next general election, they'll have done pretty damn well. And if they get 30, they'll have done amazing. I don't think they need to sort of start to spread themselves too thinly. But the flip side of that is to say, well, hang on a minute. If we can convince the kind of people that voted Labour, 11,600 of them in 2019 in Tiverton and Honiton, to make a tactical vote, well, we are suddenly in play in a lot more constituencies. And that one is just a really eternal conundrum. I'm kind of someone that leans more towards this is a flash in a pan for the by-election. But we have seen it in Cheshire and Amersham, we have seen it in North Shropshire. And of course, the more times they do this, the more you start to think, wow, this is maybe something's happening here. And of course, we get another chance to see a kind of deja vu replica of Tiverton and Honiton in Somerton and Froome soon, because the Tory MP in Somerton and Froome has got himself into some trouble due to non-declaration of money. There was some stuff in the paper about all sorts of other things going on. He's been suspended from the Tory party. This is David Warburton. His majority in Somerton and Froome at the 2019 election was 19,000. The Lib Dems were second with 17,000. And again, there we have quite a decent Labour vote. They got 8,300 votes. Now, if you think that the turnover in a by-election there would be down, that a lot of Labour people switch to the Lib Dems and a lot of Tories stay at home, I think it's quite hard to see the Lib Dems opening anything bigger than 1 to 3 to turn over a 19,000 majority, which is kind of crazy, really.
A bigger question. The Tories have won one of the by-elections. That was essentially a by-election for obvious reasons that they couldn't lose, right? So in terms of Brexit and Britain itself and what Boris is doing to the country, you see the Nicola Sturgeon story today. Obviously, she's hoping to go before late 2023, regardless of what Boris says, effectively. You have a situation now where the UK and the EU is at such loggerheads over Brexit, and you have this protocol situation. What is Britain's place in the world increasingly, Neil? Because it's becoming almost like a pariah within Europe for what Boris is doing. I can't get the protocol stuff at all. It seems to be working very well for Northern Ireland. Obviously, idiots on the unionist right who think it's a bad thing, like absolute ideological imbeciles, right? It's working well in general, and now they're basically bringing in legislation to override it. They negotiated this deal themselves.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, you know, obviously, you know what my opinion is going to be on the UK standing in the world, and you know, we've had a Tory government for 12 years. I'm clearly not a fan of that, and I don't think, you know, having Liz Truss going around the world doesn't really help you very much. I mean, what can I say? I would not be a big fan. Just looking at, just quickly go back to Will was talking about the outcome of the next election. It's quite interesting that although we had a massive moves on the Johnson leave day, not a flicker on the next general election most seats market. Literally hasn't moved, barely a penny matched on it. Now, obviously, lots of people don't want to tie up their money for more than, you know, for 2 years or whatever. But I think most people have looked at those results and said, it's all baked in. And going back also to what you said about opinion, you know, they have a 3-point lead on their polling. It is a different methodology. And they're accepting that the Labour turnout in a future general election will be a lot lower than it was in the past. I think that the Wakefield tells you that that's probably right. And, you know, I actually think that their methodology is the one that you should look at, and whenever they come out with a poll, it's a lot more interesting, I think.
William, I genuinely don't know, William, what state Labour is in. I actually wouldn't be certain at all Labour's doing that well under Keir Starmer, and it's just that everything is so skewed on the other side. But you haven't spoken in a while. What do you got to say?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. I think I'm going to give sort of two perspectives, because I think it's important to recognise that there are different views from different parts of Labour. The people running Labour at the moment, and this is not sort of an endorsement of their competence or whatever, but they would tell you we need to exhume the ghosts of 2019, and that's going to be a really long process, and we can't go that fast yet, which is something I disagree with to a point, because the key fundamentals the party's been polled on, they have been changing. They're doing better in those key issues. I think at some point they've got to have a policy. You know, and I think it would do them good to think about what they could focus on, i.e. stuff like maybe fraud or for example, stuff that could really connect. And I think their response to the strikes is a bit worrying sort of going forward. They've got themselves caught in knots. The Labour Party not being the party of Labour and trying to do this weird dance and stuff like Lammy at the weekend is not really encouraging for a general election campaign.
Well, could it at least change its name? Like if you're the Labour, you're either the Labour Party or you're not the Labour Party.
Yeah, totally. So there's that.
Well, they always used to sort of rebrand, didn't they? New Labour.
Yeah,
this lot should just be called Briefcase Labour.
Yeah.
Rebranding actually is a good point, just quickly, because we've had more than a few resets and relaunches under Starmer. They've been memory hold now, but they were doing one about every 2 or 3 weeks. And I think the party does need to find an identity. Just going back to the UK and its place in the world, especially with the Northern Ireland Protocol, we're caught between a rock and a hard place. I think when the referendum happens, and at the end, after the result, there was a feeling that we would become much more closely aligned to America and that they'd be willing to sort of take us as a partner in a bit of divergence from the European Union, not just politically, but economically, but politically. I don't think it's happened to quite the same extent some people had hoped. And regards to the Northern Ireland Protocol, the outcome's fairly predictable. There's going to be a trade war of some description at the very worst time possible, and it's just going to get very messy.
Let me put it to you this way, like William, is Brexit going to essentially end up in the breakup of the UK? That because Scotland 5-6 each two in the next election. Northern Ireland is actually in a better place now because of the protocol. That is 100% true. So what happens if the Scottish referendum takes place? What happens to the UK in 5 to 10 years?
I think it's tough to call because there's a paradox, there's a catch-22. Boris Johnson is the best argument to Scots. This has been held for a long time for the breakup of the United Kingdom. For Scottish independence, he's the best argument. He's the best motivating factor. It's then Nicola, Sturgeon, and the SNP, I think. But whilst you have Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, you're not getting pushing for a referendum. A general election would need to happen, and the SNP would need to be kingmakers. We are really not a million miles away from that. They are always consistently polling to get about 48 to 50 seats at the least. Rest sort of marginals. You got Labour on course for 280 to 300. If you had one tomorrow on the polling, not impossible that they're kingmakers. I think in the event of Indy Ref 2, a lot would come down to the campaigns, but I think Brexit has definitely given that argument a bit more steam. Although one thing I would add is some people might look at how badly it's gone in their view and sort of recoil from that, which I think is something to keep in mind for that. Just another point on Labour and just going forward for another election. One of the things that we need to be sort of aware of is the stress test that a general election will put on the party and its leadership as a whole, particularly in terms of media attacks, etc. I mean, Neil, you were out there, you were on the ground, you literally went out there and did it. A general election can really smash some assumptions to pieces. It can really put pressure on people's perceptions of a party. Starmer's made a lot of outreach to Tory supporters, to Tory media, etc. But it hasn't always been reciprocated. And I think that's something just worth keeping in mind. It's a bit like a horse going into Group 1 company. You can have a really swishy, clean profile before a derby, but then suddenly you're climbing up the first 150 yards, you get bashed 3-4 places and you're out the back with all the horses ahead of you.
Last word to you, Neil.
Just on the Johnson leaving, I was just thinking about that a little bit because, I know Paul's not here this week and he's very strong on 2022. The key thing is going to be the conference now. I mean, we've got the summer recess is the 22nd of July. So it's not very long away now. I mean, Johnson has basically survived this parliamentary session. He's not going to do anything. He's certainly not going to resign, and they're not going to be able to get rid of him in the next 3 weeks, I think. So if they want to depose him in time for the conference, like prior to the conference, they need to be doing something fairly significant in August, really. Now, of course, there's all kinds of things happening, strikes, the cost of living crisis, situation, as you say, with the EU and whatever. There's dozens of things crossing his desk at the moment. But I don't know. I kind of can't really see a pathway to them getting rid of him before the conference. And if he survives that long, I think there's a very good chance he survives the year. I think this move towards the kind of 11.085 to 4 region in terms of the 2022 departure date, I think it's massively overdone, and it's a kind of an element of recency bias. We don't really know much more than we knew 2 days before the by-election, and we could have easily had 5-2 then.
It's just the brand is so toxic, William, and I guess like how much more, what can he spin to his party in terms of what good he's done at this stage?
Very little, and that's the issue. You have this sort of double whammy of all the public services being battered by various things. Some factors which are within the government's control, others which aren't, and an unimpressive response to them. And then you have the lack of sort of space or money or time or even ambition for a signature offering that they can sell to the electorate. Levelling up, I mean, I know a lot of people say, oh, you believe in levelling up, isn't that daft or whatever? And I could take that, but levelling up was sold as the signature thing that would get people to vote Tory and keep the red wall seats. That's not going to be anywhere close to happening by 2024. Sorry.
Check out our website. Congratulations to the man who had a substantial bet on the Lib Dems winning that by-election and didn't really have a moment's worry. There was a little bit of fretting in our WhatsApp group that it might be closer than it wasn't close at all. And you do wonder how long Boris Johnson has left. He was basically elected on getting Brexit done. That hasn't even happened yet, not to mind all the other scandals. That's my view on things. You might get a slightly left-leaning take on things, at least on this podcast, but we'll be more right-wing in the future. Talk to you next week.